Hi guys, great to see you all. Today's especially an opportunity if you're a self-studier or if you're studying a smaller one of the subjects to ask any questions you have. It's also open for mentees if you do want to ask a question. So just keep the questions coming in the chat and I'll be staying on as long as I can to answer them all. There's also no rush for the questions. I know we haven't got many people online yet, so I'll give everyone a couple of moments. If you do have a question though, you can stick it in the chat. Great question, Belle. So the first one in, does reapplying disadvantage your Oxbridge application? The very simple answer to this is no. So you have to say on the application form if you are reapplying, but it makes no difference whatsoever to how they view your application. So every time, if you do wish to reapply in a future year, it will be judged completely blind and they won't think, oh, they didn't get it in before. Have they improved on this point that we said that they needed to improve on? What I would recommend is if you are reapplying or after this year, if it turns out that the application is unfortunately rejected, then what you can do is ask for feedback from how it went at either the admissions test stage or at the interview stage. And that's a really good way of knowing what stuff you can concretely work on for the next year. And Joyce as well in the chat is our co-founder, so she'll be putting some tips as we go through on some extra advice. I would entirely agree with that as well, that maybe if you applied to Oxford the first year and it didn't go well, you might want to apply to Cambridge the following year, Or if you applied to St John's and it didn't go well, maybe this time you want to apply to Girton or however it might be. San, that is a really good point. So if you are reapplying, yes, you do actually have to do a different personal statement. One of the really kind of annoying things is all the personal statements are put in a plagiarism software checker. So if you applied with the same personal statement, it will pick up on the plagiarism software checker as plagiarizing your own personal statement. So unfortunately, you do need to write a new one. That doesn't mean that you need to write completely different content. So if you've still got a favorite book and a favorite topic, you can write about it again, just maybe do it in a slightly different way and have a think. If the application wasn't successful the first time, what small changes, as Joyce said, it's about tweaks. What small changes can you make that might improve your odds? Why might they not have liked it exactly the first time? So there were two really good questions. If there's any more, keep them coming. So Sam, that's a cool question. Has anyone ever studied at Oxbridge twice? I was chatting to a friend recently who was trying to apply for a second degree at Oxbridge, and they're actually quite strict on it. So because places are quite competitive, if you're trying to apply for 2 undergraduate degrees, there's actually a lot of restrictions. So they don't usually let you apply for 2 undergraduate degrees at the same university. There's quite tight rules on whether you're allowed to do that. That said, what you can definitely do is after you're finished an undergraduate degree at Oxford, you can do a master's at Cambridge or vice versa. So 2 undergraduate degrees, quite difficult, but postgraduate points, yeah, definitely lots of people swap between the two. And for those who are going down the academia kind of route, it's quite good to get a variation of universities, because it just shows again that you're not just adjusting to one style of thinking. Cambridge might be very good at some areas, Oxford very good at another, Edinburgh very good at another. So it's about moving around to those places that specialize in what you want to specialize in. How will applying for a deferred entry affect your application? So this is a good question. I would say it kind of depends a lot on the subject. So Belle, I think you're studying like biology or biosciences, if my memory's right. If not, correct me. So it shouldn't have a huge impact. As Joyce is saying in the chat though, so it depends on the subject. Okay, yeah, biomedical science is much better than medicine for the deferred entry, because some subjects are just slightly stricter on it. The other ones that I can think of that are a bit stricter is, for example, if you're doing a language and you have a year out, they can want to see maybe a bit of evidence that that language hasn't gone completely rusty in that time out you've had that year. So they might ask you a couple of questions on what you've been doing in that year out. It might be that you've been having lessons, gone to visit the country and so on. But for biomedical sciences, I I don't think it will affect your application hugely, as long as you just keep that subject ticking over in the background. The other thing to say this year about this question is, in the round of applications, because of COVID, there might be a slight spike in applications from international students who have deferred because of the COVID placement. So there might be quite a few students trying to defer, which could affect things in terms of who gets the place. Does Oxbridge let you take a language along with your degree, like other universities? Yes, completely. So I can speak from Cambridge because that's the only one I know from experience, but they have a great language centre where it is absolutely free for anyone studying at the university to do what they call an intensive language course. Cambridge and Oxford don't really like to do anything that they don't stick the word intensive on sometimes. But what that means is you'll be taught by world-leading experts in how to learn that language, and you can do it and take it through right up to the qualification level that you want to. So a really good opportunity to do that. What you should also bear in mind is, once you're a member of the university at Cambridge and Oxford, although they're primarily expecting you to go for the subject that you wish to apply to for the lectures, you're actually welcome to attend any lecture across the university at any point. So if you are wanting to pick up extra language skills, maybe go to a lecture for that language if they're running. How will the online interviews work, from Fahim? So this is a very good question, and I can't say for certain because I haven't had an email from Oxford or Cambridge about them, but here's what I will expect to happen. Set yourself up in a nice quiet area of your house where there's not too many distractions. Try and keep the background fairly plain like mine is. It doesn't really matter if it's not the perfect background. I'm basically saying don't have your underpants drying in the background, because that might not set the best first impression. And then how those online interviews will work is, whatever platform they're run on, whether that be Zoom, Google Meet, a completely separate platform, you'll have the professors in there and you'll have yourself in there, and they'll be asking you a question. If you've got any kind of special allowances for that interview, you can always get them to write the question down in a chat so you can read it if the Wi-Fi breaks up or whatever it might be, and then it will be over to you to answer that question. If it's a particularly mathsy question, or one where they want to see you're working for whatever reason, it might be that they share an online whiteboard with you, and then it will be up over to you to annotate that whiteboard in any way you like. So that's how I'm roughly expecting them to work. What you should know is, although this is fairly new for this year for you guys, if you're worried about kind of it's going to be a huge change, every year Cambridge and Oxford interview lots of their international students online. So they are really familiar with doing this, and they make sure that it's going to be as fair as possible and completely even. And so if you're worried about kind of how different it's going to be, they're really used to adjusting for this and working out how to take it into account, because they're used to for international students. It will still very much be just that last thing on the online interviews, usually multiple professors for one student. Don't be daunted by that. It's just because that's the way they always set it up. So it's not just one person making a decision on your application. Say one person didn't like one of your answers, but the next interviewer loved it. That means that you get a bit of balance. So it's actually probably an advantage to have those multiple interviewers still, rather than just a one-on-one. Tips for interview preparation. Great question. I'll give you some of mine, and I think Joyce might write a few of hers in the chat as well. My top tip for interview preparation is just to practice doing new things. So the interview will take you slightly beyond your comfort zone on things you haven't covered before, because one of the whole points of it is they want to see how you react when you're given new information and information that you won't be expected to have dealt with before. That's a big part of the Oxbridge degree. So if there's any way you can prepare by just, let's say you're an English student, going to a random passage and analysing it, that could be a really good way to prepare. Let's say you see a news story that's related to your subject. Go to that and think, if someone asked me about this at interview, what would I say on it? And then keep that answer real. Research, enthusiasm, analysis, lateral thinking. It's like the perfect checklist for everything you might want to cover in that interview. The research, do I know any extra facts, knowledge that I can bring in here that shows me as an authority on that topic? The enthusiasm, how can I make my response engaging? It sounds a lot better if you're smiling, interested, laughing if the interviewer makes a comment on it at the appropriate stage, rather than looking completely panicked the whole time and really scared to answer. So if you can get that enthusiasm, great. For the analysis, it's then all about not just talking about that research, but sharing your analysis on that topic, something that you think in response to what's been brought up. It can be very easy in the interview to, let's say you're asked a question on economic depression and you think, great, I know loads about John Maynard Keynes, so I'm going to talk all about him. Great that you know about John Maynard Keynes, part of your answer, but they're not trying to give John Maynard Keynes the place. This is your opportunity to show what you think. So in that analysis, show it for you. And then the lateral thinking is about making that unique. So have a think, is there something that I can say here that someone else might not think of in their answer? Something completely unique in that, and lateral thinking is a really good way to structure your answer. The last bits of advice for interview preparation are the 21st of November, I'm going to plug our interview preparation conference, which all of you are invited to. If you are preparing for your interview there, we will give you a whole variety of tips. As I say, there'll be a director of studies, formerly at Oxford, Cambridge as well, who will be sharing his tips on what he looks for at an interview. A load of our team who have done the interviews, sharing their personal experiences. So I think that's a really good opportunity to hear a whole range of tips for interview preparation that aren't just for me. Something to do in the meantime, as Joyce says, review your learning log, the document you've been writing on, things that you've been reading as you've been going along, exercises, practicals, a lecture you might have seen online, whatever it might be. And that's a really good one that's reminded me as well. Knowing your UCAS personal statement inside out. This is something we'll be doing a lot of in the 21st of November conference. But if you haven't done it yet, or you don't have a mentor, my really top tip for this, go through your personal statement or get a friend, a teacher to go through your personal statement and say, what questions would you ask me on this? It's quite a common way to start an interview, that they ask you a question based on your personal statement. So you can kind of predict what they are, what you might want to bring into your answer. And it just means that first question, if you're feeling a bit nervous on the day, you can think, I prepared this, I got this, so here's my nice strong answer. That was a very long answer to your question then, Sam. I hope it helps. If you've got any more points on that, just let me know. So Elizabeth, as the interviews are in school, will we still be given time to prepare for directly beforehand? So what I would say to this is, if you're talking, maybe if I'm wrong on this, clarify for me, Elizabeth, but if you're talking about sometimes you have a bit of work to do right before you go into the interview, so like maybe a little translation to do, a passage to analyze, a piece of information to read to go into the interview with your views on it, that will still be given to you beforehand. And look really carefully at the Oxford and Cambridge email, because it might be that if your interview starts at 11, they're saying log in at 10:30 and there'll be this document that appears that you can then do that analysis for. So if they are going to set you something before the interview starts, they're definitely still going to give you enough time to look at that. Will interviewers discuss the essay from your admissions assessment, says Fahim. Great question. They don't have to, but they definitely can. So it's a really good idea to have a think about that in advance. It's definitely a topic that can come up. So what I recommend to all of my mentees, and if you're on the self-study, something that I would really strongly encourage you to do, is after you've done your admissions test, good luck, they are coming up soon, really good luck everyone. Then what I would recommend is before you go and celebrate for the evening, forget all about the questions, have a big party, what you should do is just make a quick note as you come out of the room on the question that you might have answered or a couple of points that you put in your answer. You don't have to kind of memorize the whole information, but just make down a couple of notes. The most common way that the admissions assessment essay comes up at interview, I think, is they ask, what would you change about your answer? And that question is designed to assess one thing that's really important, teachability. They're not just looking every year for the best candidate to apply. And that might seem slightly, surely that's what you're looking for. Actually, what they're looking for is the people they most want to teach, who are most passionate about their subject and most willing to learn. Because you're going to have a tutorial or a supervision with this person really regularly through the term time. So they don't want to go into that with someone who's this huge boffin who always thinks they've written the perfect answer each time and is going to debate with them about how their answer's perfect. They want someone who's going to sit in there and go, I see what you mean. This is how I can refine my answer. So what I would say is they can discuss your essay, but don't just prepare the content that you put in it. Prepare what would you do differently. Now it's kind of a month further down the line and something that you could think about again and add extra points to, add extra information to. And Joyce says that she was asked if she could remember the title of a submitted history essay. That's a really good one. It goes back to making sure you know personal statement and submitted work like the back of your hand. I was asked in my one when a piece of my submitted work came up. So I submitted a piece on book 4 of the Aeneid on kind of responsibility for Dido's death. They asked me to summarize my argument in 2 sentences. That might seem like a horrible question at first, but it's basically, have I thought about this since? Have I been able to kind of condense a quite long piece of submitted work into a really clear thought? So that's what we mean by knowing it like the back of your hand. Do universities get to know your admissions test results before you? So what I can say for sure about is they'll know the admissions test result when they make a decision on who they invite to interview, if it's at Oxbridge or if it's for UCAT or BMAT, then yes, they know in advance and will use that to decide who gets a place, okay? But you will also be kind of encouraged to have a think about what comments you might have to improve your performance in exactly the same way. So it doesn't just mean that kind of if someone gets 70 and someone gets 60, the person with 70 is going in with a huge advantage into an interview or into that application. It's all contextualized. So if you've got a 70 from a state comp that Oxbridge have said requires improvement, that means something quite different to a 70 from someone applying to Eton, applying from Eton, for example. So that is kind of something to not hugely be worried about. It's just kind of, I'd say in most of the middle, it's okay. It's only if you do maybe not that well at all in the admissions test that it kind of might be more of an issue. Or if you do amazingly, you're kind of scoring in the 99th percentile of all the people who apply, then it will probably have a bit of an advantage. You've already got your foot in the door when you walk into that interview and they're thinking, right, this candidate's a strong one. These are some really great questions, guys. If you have more, keep them coming in. I think we've got a nice small group today. We've got kind of 5 or 6, so it's almost like a supervision number, or kind of a private session. So Sam says, should we be worried about how they will judge us, or should we focus on doing our best? For example, worrying about whether we came across as confident or shy. Really good question, Sam. So definitely don't worry about this at all. All of the interviewers actually have to do a training course before they interview you about completely ignoring biases, any perceptions as you walk into the room. So if you walk into the room, accidentally trip over and whatever it might be, I know that won't happen with online interviews this year, but let's say someone walks in halfway through your interview and asks you a question, they have to completely ignore that. Not just they might, they are told that they absolutely have to ignore that. So don't worry if you're feeling really shy or if you come across as confident. Just do your best and try and be you. Especially if you're nervous, there are loads of people who in their mind kind of might muck up the first question a bit, are really nervous, so they just kind of misunderstand the first question, get it slightly wrong, need a bit of an extra prompt. That's fine. I would say the first question, if you answer it well, great, but if you answer it badly, they kind of take it as a question that you can have to adjust a bit for your nerves. So the main thing is if the first question doesn't go too well, don't panic, keep calm, listen really carefully to the second question, maybe take a couple of seconds to kind of compose yourself before answering again. You don't have to answer straight away. You can take a couple of moments and then have another go. So yeah, confident, shy, it really doesn't matter. What I would say is if you are really confident, the most important thing is never interrupt the interviewer. They won't interrupt you, so you don't interrupt them, okay? Every word that an interviewer might ask in when they ask a question will give you a hint, something that you can think about that you might want to include in your answer. So by interrupting them, you basically just lose the chance for a hint. They won't interrupt you either. So be careful to know where you want to finish your answer. You might make a really good point and then kind of just carry on speaking, not really saying too much or repeating yourself. They won't interrupt you and say, thanks, we've got the idea. They'll let you finish speaking until there's that silence and the next question can come. So my general rule is I've rarely seen kind of really tight interview answers that are over 3 minutes. If you're speaking for over 3 minutes, have a think, am I repeating myself now? And try and keep it maybe slightly less than that timing. And then Fahim also says, if you mentioned a book by a Cambridge professor, could this result in them being present at your interview? Yes, it can. Okay, if you mention something by someone who's the director of studies at your college, it might be that that person's interviewing you. They don't kind of deliberately try and pair you. So let's say you mentioned a really famous economics professor, but you didn't apply to their college, or they wouldn't have kind of been naturally associated with your application. They won't contact that person and say, do you want to interview them? It's still done kind of randomly, but there is a chance that everything aligns and that person that you wrote about in your personal statement is the person who interviews you. If that happens, well, first of all, it's pretty cool. What I would also say is be really careful of kind of trying to summarize the plot of their book to them. They know about that because they wrote it. So really engage in analysis, not in plot. Don't say kind of they said this, this, and this. Say what you think about what they said, and be prepared for kind of a lively discussion on it. The interviewer will probably naturally kind of take a bit of the opposite side because they want to put your view to the test, see if you can back it up and defend your viewpoint. That goes for humanities, but also for all of the sciences. They're going to question your working out and your thought process. So if it's the person who's written the book, they're going to know these arguments really well. So what I would say is if you get a choice of what to talk about and it's that person in the room, I might pick something slightly different, because talking about them with their own book is a pretty cool discussion, but something that could be pretty difficult. I might want to move on to something else if I get the choice. How badly will a poor math score impact your chances? So it's a really good questions, Sophie, and one where there's kind of a grade of answers slightly. Obviously, if the maths really is kind of a disaster, then it might have an impact. Well, it will have an impact on whether or not you get invited to interview. So the most important thing is kind of when you go into that, if one of the questions goes awfully, keep going, keep trying, keep thinking of other ways around the problems, okay? But that said, if you just do kind of slightly below average, you kind of score maybe in the percentage that 40% of people get that score, that doesn't rule you out. And especially for you guys applying from state schools, with especially if maybe some people have extenuating circumstances, whatever it might be, these are contextualized. That is the advantage that you guys have. So it's not just, can I beat someone from a private school who's been kind of taught really explicitly to do the math? Okay, this will be an opportunity for you guys to just think about it in the best way you can and then have that contextualized. So it's one part, Sophie, it's considered alongside personal statement, submitted work. If you then get invited to interview, the final thing is then considered the mat alongside the interview performance as well. It's one part. If you do badly in one part, it's not going to be the end of the world. If both the submitted work and the mat start getting weaker, then that's maybe where people don't get invited to interview. How important are predicted grades, says Elizabeth, i.e. 3 A stars for an A star, A course? Okay, so if I take this generally first, there's a very kind of basic rule to it, which is I think Cambridge prioritize grades more than Oxford do. Oxford tends to put a bit more weighting on their own procedure in terms of the admissions test and how you perform an interview. And at Oxford, I think it's fairly common to sometimes get slightly more interviews than at Cambridge. Cambridge do put a bit more emphasis on whether you scored, for example, in the 95th percentile and above for the predicted grades you have. So what I would say there is it's kind of a bit, maybe for Oxford, a bit more like if you've got 3 A stars for an A star A course, great. That's definitely an advantage, but that's not going to guarantee you an interview. You still need to perform well in the pre-interview admissions test and so on. If you're applying to Cambridge with 3 A stars for an A star AA course, it will probably give you a slight advantage. They might look at that and go, great. But again, it's not going to guarantee you an interview. So getting above the grade boundaries, probably slightly more useful for Cambridge than for Oxford, but in both of them, it's just, again, another factor that helps. Just scrolling down, having a look at some more questions. Joyce says, Sophie, for you, there are students who haven't performed well in the mat who have got an interview, so hopefully that's some reassurance. Are you allowed to take notes in an online interview? Yes, you are completely allowed to take notes in an online interview. What I would actually recommend, and this was something I think I said in the webinar for the admissions test as well, is if you've got it online, feel free to bring in an actual a pen and piece of paper and make notes next to you. You don't have to do it all online. If you just want to make a note of, say it's a long question, it's a 30-second question, and you want to write down one keyword in the question, just make a note of that keyword right next to you, and then you know you're going to include it in your answer. So definitely you're allowed to take notes. If they expect you to take notes, if they want you to take notes, then it's probably best to do it on the interactive whiteboard. But I would 100% have a piece of paper and a pencil next to me, like I do now when I can make keynotes as you guys are asking the questions, because it's just a good way to jog your memory. Elizabeth says, I've seen some interview questions online that have been based on A2 content I haven't covered yet. Should I read ahead and try and learn this? What I would say is try as much as you can, probably, to not worry too much about what some people are posting online, because what the newspapers love to do each year is the interview goes up in difficulty as you go through. So the first question might be something based on your personal statement that you read about ahead on your course that they're now asking you about. And then someone puts that online and someone else completely panics and go, I didn't read ahead like this person, and now this is a question. So they usually do base those first couple of questions. It's not just going to be kind of going in and getting a test on content you're not expected to have learned yet. What I would say is it will then kind of go up in stages throughout the interview. So if you've mentioned something that you know is linked really closely to a topic that comes up later in your A-level course, they might ask you a question to begin testing that. So if you do want to read ahead on a topic that's really familiar to one you know there, that you've brought up in your personal statement or brought up in your submitted work, you can read ahead, but it's not going to be expected. I think some of the harshest questions I've seen are kind of, I think people have gone into interviews at Oxford and been asked kind of, what's the first line of this book that you mentioned in your personal statement or something like that. And if that's a set text you covered at school, just make sure you do know those books really well, like front and back, or what it might be for there. So it's very rarely a content test exactly. It's more just kind of, it can be one tiny part of the interview. So just looking down, Sophia says, will there be added pressure in the interview if there were no admissions tests or interview work? I'm doing geography and the GAT was suspended. Really good question, Sophia. So what this means to me, I have no guarantee of this yet. It's just an opinion based on looking at subjects that sometimes don't have admissions tests. I think it's pretty likely you'll be given something to do in the interview that other candidates are also going to be given to do. So it might be that they hand you, if I use an example from one of my friend's geography interviews, they were given a graph with kind of a made up thing on the x-axis and something else on the y-axis. And they were told, what do you think this thing on the x-axis is? And how does it change based on this graph? So what I would say is that's not kind of a whole load of added pressure on how you perform in that, but they are probably going to give you some kind of material like they might have done at the GAT in the interview itself to see how you can react, how you can analyze that material. It can be quite difficult to prepare for that. So my top tip would be, if there are admissions tests for your subjects that would usually run that aren't running, still practice those questions because they're going to be really good for any interview preparation, but also those kind of tasks that might come up. Then what I would recommend is also for kind of these specific ones is just keep on, as I said right at the start of this, trying new things. If you see a graph that comes up online, say for geography, let's say you're looking particularly closely at climate change at the moment. The David Attenborough documentary is great on this. If no one's watched that yet, I really enjoyed that. Then maybe have a think about maybe a graph that's used in that or analysis that someone's done on that on a particular website, and think about how you might respond to that. Do you agree with their analysis? Are there any weaknesses in their analysis? That's the exact kind of skills that will prepare for the interview. What's the approximate time period to hear back from Oxford about whether you're being invited to interview or not? Really good question, Sophia. It does kind of vary a bit. What I would say is interviews start from kind of late November onwards. For UK applicants, they're mainly in early December. So they should definitely let you know about 14 days before your interview when that will be. That's the kind of the latest they can let you know. So I think my one came through in kind of mid-November time. That's not saying that they'll come through exactly that point this year again, but kind of middle to slightly later November is fairly common on when you hear back from Oxford. Will GCSE grades affect your application badly, i.e. a B in a core subject like English language, or will it depend on your chosen course? Really good question, Sam. So this goes back, I know I've said contextualized quite a lot, but it does go back to this. So if, for example, you've got a great set of grades and then one subject drops down, you might have had an off day, that's absolutely fine. They're probably not going to take a huge look at that. The main thing I would say is if you're applying to, say, let's say you're applying to physics at Oxford and you've got a B in GCSE physics, that will be more of an issue. So if it's in the chosen course subject, the GCSE grade will be something they think about, right? Why did this person get that grade? Were there any circumstances for it, and so on? If you're applying to the physics and you got the B in a course subject like GCSE English language, it's not going to rule out your application. It's not going to be something where they think, right, we can't invite this person now. So I would say it's mainly based on if it's in that chosen course. I would say especially as well, the same goes back to Oxford and Cambridge. Cambridge take a little bit more notice of the GCSE grades than maybe Oxford do, but both it's still possible. How long are the interviews? Is it just one part, or will there be a break in between? Great question, Fahim. They can vary a bit. The standard length of an interview is about 20, 25 minutes, I would say, from the subjects I have experience on. The longest I've heard of an interview going on is 40 minutes. It will guaranteed be less than an hour. I would say the longest that you get is for maths, that kind of where there's kind of a lot of stages in the problem to work through. So that's kind of the ones that are more like the length of 40 minutes. They're not going to sit you down though for 2 hours and take you through it. And then the second part of that question is it just one part, or will there be a break in between? So this is a really good question. Even within one interview, sometimes there are two parts to it. So if I give you an example for mine, the first half of my interview was discussing kind of work I'd submitted in advance. So a bit from my personal statement, a bit from submitted work. And that was with one of the interviewers. And then he said, thank you, that's the end of this part of the interview. I'm going to hand over to my colleague who's got this information for you to look at, and then take a minute to kind of read that information and then let us know your thoughts on it. So that was kind of a multi-part to that interview, where it meant that, let's say I did really well on one part and really badly on another. It's a chance to kind of have a fresh approach, start again halfway through the interview. Maybe I've kind of settled into it more then. So there can be kind of multiple parts to the interview, or multiple problems, or different stages of it. It's not just going to be kind of the topic you walk in and get asked your first question on is the one you're going to have to do for the whole time. If you get multiple interviews, then there is usually a break in between them. Some people can have a really long break in between them. Some of them, it can be a lot shorter. With online, I think they'll kind of try and queue them up as best they can. Oxford, we've heard of interviews going on for kind of 2-3 days. Cambridge, it's kind of, maybe 2 days is kind of lots of people have had interviews spaced over 2 days. I don't know online whether they'll try and make it one as far as possible. But there is multiple interviews, and there will be a break in between. They won't expect you to kind of, if one of your interviews finishes at 12, you're not going to expect to be expected in the next one at 12. You'll get a little bit of time to get yourself a drink, have a little snack before you go into the next one. Joyce has said as well, yeah. So humanities interviews, approximately 20 minutes. Maths, can go up to an hour. So Sophie says, how do you think the interviews will be different this year because they're online? Do you think it's an advantage or a disadvantage? Great question, Sophie. So I don't think the interviews will be hugely different. I think they will kind of stay as similar as possible to what they had. I think maybe they might kind of, if it was me, I actually think it's an advantage for you guys, because there's kind of, I think kind of when private schools prepare people for an interview, there's things like when you walk into the room, like shake the person's hand, sit down, don't fidget, all this kind of stuff that some people get told, and they kind of go in there with, maybe some people with quite a bit of confidence just because they've been prepped for that scenario. This scenario of them being online is completely new to everyone. So I think for you guys, it's kind of, who maybe haven't been kind of taught how to prepare for this for 4 or 5 years in advance, maybe in some cases, it's an advantage for you guys because it's new for everyone. So it's harder for kind of people to game the system to work out the advantages that people should do when they walk in. I think it does make it quite fair, it being online for everyone. So I kind of advantage, disadvantage, maybe a slight advantage, I think. What I would say to that is it's very subjective. So that's just my view on it. Fahim, would an economics interview be 20 minutes then? It could well be. Economists have had 20-minute interviews before. Some have had 30. I've known some that the actual interviewers got carried away with it, and kind of the next person has to knock on the door because they're waiting for their interviewer, and the interviewer then has to bring it to a close. These guys are just as passionate about the subjects as hopefully you guys are yourselves in those subjects. So if they're really interested, you might get a couple of extra minutes on the end to carry on talking about it. Will we get interviewed by a different college if they're online? So this, again, some colleges, some subjects, you'll get interviews at multiple colleges, and that will still go ahead if it's online. So you'll get multiple different colleges interviewing you. That's all organized centrally by the university. So it might be that a different college just has a different link, and they'll send you through all of those links when you're expected to log on to those accounts, so you can just do so straight away. It's going to be just as easy to be interviewed by another college this year as it was in previous years. Would you recommend taking the interviews days out of school in order to prepare? This is a good question, Belle. I personally think that the school time is just as important. And if I was at home all day, I would actually be more stressed about the interviews. I'd be kind of thinking that I have to use every minute of that day to prepare for the interview, everything like that. I think school is actually quite a good way of keeping your brain in gear. You're still kind of doing all of those academic skills that you'll be needing, whilst forcing you to be distracted from the interview because you're having to do other work. And I think in some ways that's quite good preparation. They make these interviews quite difficult to prepare for that unknown section. Of course, know your personal statement back to front, your submitted work, all the stuff I've said earlier. But once you've done that, you're kind of ready to go, and you've got enough time now, if you start preparing now, that you shouldn't need to take those couple of days out of school to prepare. So I would probably say actually stick in school, and then maybe the day of the interview itself, if you've got lots of interviews all day, then yes, I think you can request that day off and say, I've got an interview online at 10, an interview online at 4, so I need that day off school. Oh yeah, and as Joyce has said here in answer to Elizabeth's question, it's not just kind of the different colleges that you'll be interviewed at. You also get the names of the interviewers. So they don't expect you to know what they specialize in. It doesn't really matter. This discussion is all about you, not about those interviewers. But for me, it was quite a nice peace of mind to look up the names of those interviewers before, so I could see what they did do, what they looked like, things like that. So that when I logged into the interview, it wasn't a shock. It was kind of, oh, now I know this about this person, and now I know this about this person. It just kind of helped put my mind at ease a bit. Fantastic. If we've got any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I think we've had a great range of questions so far. If you are typing out another question, just give me like a yes or wait a minute in the chat. If not, I'd say in kind of a couple of minutes. I think we've covered a great amount of stuff today. So yeah, if you're writing a question, I'll give you kind of a couple of minutes. If not, I'll leave you guys to enjoy Halloween. Brilliant. Okay, I think, yeah, that looks like it's all of the questions for today. So thank you. I think Elizabeth, Fahim, Belle, Sophie, Sophia as well. I think I've included everyone there. If I've left one of you out, I'm really sorry. But thank you for tuning in. Have a great week. If you have any more questions that come to you between now and then, just drop me an email, james@insightoutreach.org, and I'll be happy to answer. Have a really good Halloween, guys, and best of luck with the admissions tests and with the interviews. And hopefully I'll be seeing you all on the 21st of November for our conference. Bye, everyone.